What's going on, everybody, and welcome back to the Locked On Pirates podcast here on Monday, October 10th. My name is Ethan Smith of that podcast, and I hope you guys are all having a wonderful Monday. And player reviews start today. Gary Morgan will be joining me to kick off the player review series over the next couple of weeks. But today we're going to be looking at an entire group of players. We're going to be looking at the starting rotation, talking about the things we like, talking about the things we didn't like, what we expect from the rotation over the offseason in terms of additions or subtractions, as well as what we expect to see from the Pittsburgh Pirates via the starting rotation heading into 2023, because there's a lot to talk about with the amount of pitchers that this team could have at their disposal mid 2023 and beyond. Thank you so much for tuning into the Locked On Pirates podcast, as you always do. And also, thank you for making me your first listen of the day when you do tune in and listen here on YouTube, Spotify, Odyssey, Google Play, or wherever you get your podcasts. Today's episode is brought to you by the wonderful people over at Simply Safe. More on them later, but let's have a great episode, everybody.
You are Locked On Pirates, your daily Pittsburgh Pirates podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, everybody. Welcome back to the Locked On Pirates podcast, where it is your host, Ethan Smith, as well as Gary Morgan, coming at you on Monday, October 10th. Recording on Sunday, October 9th, so there's some certain things we do not know about anything in the sports world that I would usually just randomly bring up, like the wild card games with the elimination game. Is it only the one elimination game today, or is it two?
I think there's only one left.
I believe it's the Mets and the Padres, right?
Yep.
Which has some potential to be pretty fun, if you ask me. Very interesting, and the main thought I had in my head last night while watching all these games was, man, I miss the Pirates being in the playoffs. I really do. But if you look at what we're going to talk about today with the starting pitching staff, which used to be the major weakness of this roster, is suddenly starting to formulate itself into an actual kind of stable a little bit in terms of the guys that are here. And you look up and down the roster, and a bunch of guys got starts this year because, of course, me and Gary's favorite thing happened a lot this year with the bullpen games. So I will take those out of circulation in terms of guys who did get starts. Mitch Keller ended up leading this team with 29 starts. Brubaker right behind him at 28. Thompson at 22. Bryce Wilson and Quintana at 20. Rowanzi at 18, Oviedo at 7, and Ortiz at 4, and then Eichhoff at 1, if anybody even remembers that one, and then Yurfure at 1. Ironically, JT Brubaker led in most of the categories in terms of strikeouts and stuff like that, but Will Crow was the leader in wins. I'm going to talk about relief pitching tomorrow as well as the first base side of things. I think this question now has two answers, but who impressed you the most in this pitching staff this year, and who do you think took the biggest leap from what we saw in 2021?
Mitch Keller and Mitch Keller. And, I mean, a very impressive evolution from him, and I feel really confident having him come back next year. I would be shocked if he wasn't the opening day starter. Mm-hmm. I think he kind of pitched himself to another level. That was a big jump he took this year. A lot of people will discount that, but this was a big jump from one year to the next that a lot of guys don't ever make. It's a much slower progression for most players.
Oh, yeah, and you're also talking about Mitch Keller being a guy who I'm not sure if this is the first time in his career, but I would assume based off of his play from the last couple years that he was a positive wins above replacement guy this year. 2.0, 3.91 ERA, 1.4 whip, 7 Ks per 9. I mean, he was very good this year. Ended up pitching the most innings of any Pirates player this year at 159, which I found very nice as well. And I
Yep.
agree with you 100%, and I don't think anybody else can really disagree on it that Mitch Keller, arguably not even just pitching, was probably the most improved player on this entire roster. I mean, it's very easy to say that because you looked at the just progression of what we saw of Mitch Keller, if you want to call it progression, over the last couple of years. But I remember we talked about this last year in regards to Keller, that going into last year, it was his third year. But if you looked at his statistics, and you can look at the statistics now from this season and kind of look at that based off of what he's done, he'd hardly pitched even really what you would consider a full season going into
Yep.
last year and even through last year. So if you're telling me that 2022 was really only his like second full year, he's only going to get better in my mind as long as he continues to impress where he impressed, which was having command on most of his pitches.
Yeah,
And
I mean,
putting
even
them
right
where
now,
they need
he's just got a little over 2 years of service time.
to be.
So
Mhm.
I mean, like, yes, he's still a young player. I think a lot of people just kind of forget that. You know, his arbitration award this year will pretty much say it all. I know a lot of you want to look at his ERA. Oh, it's almost 4. That's not great. It kind of is. It kind of is on a team like this, and with where he was, it's a big jump. So yeah, I look for him to be a rock next year in this starting rotation. And you already mentioned it too. You know, JT Brubaker, I think is a lock to be back, if nothing else, because he's one of the few that's proven he can eat a ton of innings. And he's got to figure a way to stay healthy. I'll say
Yeah.
that. And Rowanzi Contreras, you figure, is going to be able to take a jump next year, if only because they're going to let him. I mean, they held him back this year like crazy.
They
So
did.
next year, you know, you got those 3 horses. I think Johan Oviedo has every chance to be in the starting rotation opening day.
Mhm.
No reason why he shouldn't. And then I think they have to get a free agent.
Yeah,
They still
but
have options, but
oh, they do. And that's where we'll get into this a little bit more shortly. Is if you're telling me as a Pirates fan 2 years ago that in 2023 your rotation would end up being Keller, Brubaker, Contreras, and Johan Oviedo, and then you have to sign a free agent, I would have probably said, okay, this is probably not going to be that great. Now looking at that, assuming who the free agent could be, which would probably be one of the smaller level guys, but the Pirates, again, as I always say, have proven they can find quality free agent pitching the last 2 years in Tyler Anderson and Quintana. It's going to be interesting because then if they pull that off, and you're not asking that guy to be the top guy or do whatever, you're just asking him really to eat quality innings, this pitching staff starts to look really good. And you just mentioned the options, which we'll get into here in a minute. Um, the Pirates are going to have a plethora of arms next year. So I'm fully expecting this team, hopefully, to stay healthy in this department because there is going to be a lot to choose from for this roster. And I'm not just saying that just because of the names that I think are going to come up here. It's because I know they're going to be up here. They're going to be up here at some point. Now, I'm not saying it's going to be right at the beginning of 2023 and you're just going to see 20 pitchers fighting for 10 spots. Like, you're not going to see that. But progressively through the year, you're just going to see a lot of other names that we've all heard on the prospects list all coming up. Are they going to be starters? Are they going to be relievers? We don't know that yet.
I mean, here's the real beauty of it, Ethan, is you can try to keep them in the dark, but you're talking about the Quinn Priesters of the world, Mike Burrows and Luis Ortiz and even Cody Bolton, you know, Carmen Machinsky, guys like that we know are getting pretty close. They're going to be in the mix next year as far as competition goes. Well, here's the difference this year from last year. Last year, the Pirates had, I would say, at least a decent starting 5 as far as their rotation goes when you have Quintana in there. They had Keller, they had Zach Thompson. I felt like he was at least a good swing to take. it was okay. And they ended up being all right. But the only rookie they had coming up with any kind of pedigree that was going to be ready was Rowanzi.
Yep.
That was it. This year, you're going to have guys that have already played in Major League Baseball that aren't going to make this rotation because they get squeezed out. That makes your bullpen better. That makes your AAA depth better. And then you get to this swath of young players that are going to push their way onto this roster at some point. That's why it can be better. And that's why you don't go out and sign 2 or 3 starters or something, because you just don't need that.
No. And then at that point, you're also just blocking young players that you, as me and Gary say all the time, and Gary preaches to a lot of everybody who listens to this podcast every time we talk about prospects, you have to get looks at these kids. You can't sit there and just, oh, we have a prospect here. Like, this might be how other teams operate, but even they think the same way. I mean, look at the Yankees. They could have signed any of the big shortstops in free agency. They said, why would we do that when we have Oswaldo Cabrera, just for an example? So every team does it, and the Pirates are going to have options. If you want to have the option of keeping your house safe and not getting broken into, because that doesn't sound fun. I don't think Gary would want somebody breaking into his house and stealing all of his really cool pirate stuff that he has. I also don't think they would get past him anyway. That's just my opinion. But maybe we should use Simply Safe. The numbers don't lie. In the last decade, over 4 million people have chosen Simply Safe home security to protect their home. You don't earn the trust of that many people without doing something right. At Simply Safe, your safety is the only thing that matters, and I know because I use Simply Safe in my own home. It's literally right over there. They protect you with cutting-edge security technology powered by 24/7 professional monitoring agents who always have your back. With 24/7 professional monitoring, Simply Safe's agents call you the moment a threat is detected and dispatch police or first responders in an emergency, even if you're not home or can't be reached. It also blankets your home in protection with advanced sensors in every room, window, and door. HD security cameras for inside and outside your home, as well as smarter ways to detect motion that only alert you when a threat is real, and even hazard sensors that instantly detect fires, floods, and other threats to your home. Customize the perfect system for your home in just a few minutes at simplysafe.com/lockedonmlb to save 20% off on your Simply Safe security system when you sign up for an interactive monitoring plan and get your first month free. Visit simplysafe.com/lockedonmlb to learn more, and there's no safe like Simply Safe. Maybe the Blue Jays should have used Simply Safe to protect their lead last night. That was probably a little early, but I was also noted off air with Sully Baseball over at Locked On MLB that I predicted jokingly that we were going to get a Mariners and Phillies World Series. I don't look pretty stupid right now. We'll see how the NLDS and stuff goes, but I don't look too bad right now. But in all seriousness, I kind of want to also get into these player reviews with the Pirates while the postseason is going on, because I feel like it's very good to be able to compare what the Pirates have to what these postseason teams have. And obviously, if we're looking up and down the postseason teams, even the ones that got eliminated, but the team that I'm going to mention here isn't, the team that can most compare to Pittsburgh, I would say in my mind, in terms of what the Pirates could be at some point, is the Cleveland Guardians. And I think a lot of people immediately say this because, and this is why I say it, you look at the payroll that they use, you look at how they kind of operate, they operate a lot like Pittsburgh does. Small market roster that builds within. If the Pirates could eventually do this, which I do think with the arms that they currently possess in their system, they can end up building a rotation a lot like Cleveland's. Is there a chance that you see this starting to really take shape in 2023, or do you still think we have to really be much more patient on actually seeing just a solidified 5 to 6 man rotation for the next couple of years?
I mean, I think they'll be a competent group next year, but I don't think they're going to be earth-shattering or anything.
No.
it takes time too for these kids. Like their arrival date, this is something I've always preached, and you know this. That's why I hate those projected arrival date things that people like to put out. Like, oh, in 23, this rotation could be Quinn Priester and blah, blah. I hate that stuff because maybe it is, but he's not going to be at the height of his powers. It
No.
takes a while for these kids to like actually learn how to pitch. That's why pitching is so expensive, because you can blow up all of your control time just teaching them. Look at what just happened with Mitch Keller. Like, this is like, we talked about his service time. He's only a little over 2 years, but he's been here for a while, right? This is
Very
his
long time.
Yeah, he's going into his fourth season now of major league pitching. He's finally to the point where you're like, yes, that is a dude. Right? I mean, man, that took a while. Rowanzi was really good this year. And then he really started to struggle towards the end, didn't he?
Just a little bit.
Now, did he get tired, or did people kind of start to catch on that he's only throwing 2 pitches? And we can sit on that slider because we know he can't place it, or there's just things that have to come when they're learning how to pitch. So I like what's coming. I like the potential of it. But man, I'm not going to sit here and tell you 2023 you're going to see this Cleveland Guardians like team emerge out of there. No, I don't see that.
Well, and neither do I. I would say that 2024-ish, like by then, when you have hopefully Keller, Contreras, like all these guys like solidified, and you're not. The thing that I think my mindset comes into this with the potential of them having something like that is what the Pirates have done effectively now is that they have, we'll just say the 3 guys that we know, Brubaker, Keller, and Contreras. What is the first thing you should think about when you hear that? Any pitcher that comes up here is not going to be automatically asked to be the guy right away. That is the best thing you can do because they cannot be asked to be the guy right away. You know who we saw that with? And you guys are probably tired of hearing his name at this point, but I hope you're not. Mitch Keller. Yeah. Whenever he came up here, he was like the only guy. It was like, okay, all eyes are on him. You have to be the guy right now. You're a top 100 prospect in baseball kind of deal.
I'd also say something else that the Pirates did this year that gives me some hope that they can get to that point. They identified a kid in single A that was doing things that made it look like it was silly to have him in single A, and they moved him up. And then he did things that made it look silly to have him in double A, and they moved him up. And then after only giving him a couple starts in triple A, they were like, I mean, where else can we go? Let's get him up here. And Luis Ortiz makes it all the way to the majors. As long as they can identify when a guy does get it and get them here, yeah, they can have that kind of rotation. But if you keep everything on schedule and that kid is right now in double A and we're just looking at him from afar,
what's the point, right?
Well, you don't even know that he exists yet, really. So I would say take from that a couple things. One, Luis Ortiz came from single A and made it all the way here.
Yeah.
And most of you didn't even know who he was, right? Before he made his debut.
Oh,
And
I mean, I
Mike Burrows and Quinn Priester didn't, did they?
No.
Right. So maybe the Pirates kind of know what they're doing as far as identifying talent a little bit. Maybe we should give them a little more credit than we do as far as understanding what is ready for major leagues and what isn't. Maybe not everything is manipulation.
Maybe it's not. And we're actually going to include a little bit of the bullpen today because I thought about it that these player reviews are kind of going out on the fly, by the way, everybody listening. I'm just kind of knocking them out the way I want to. There are some interesting things to talk about with this bullpen as well. And the reason that I can include it here is because what we're also mentioning about all of these pitchers that are going to come up next year some of them are not going to make it in the rotation. It's just how baseball works. It is. You only have so many spots in a starting rotation. You can't have 8 guys. Like, you can't have a pitcher pitching every 9 days. It's not going to work. So where do you put those guys? You put them in the bullpen. The bullpen, I would say, this year wasn't awful, but it was mediocre at times. I mean, you talk about the one stat that I heard last week about the Pirates losing 16 games when leading by 2 or more runs in the 8th inning or later. Very specific stat, but that preaches to what this bullpen did. And, I mean, you also can go down the list about all of these players and all of the relief pitchers. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to look at the bright spots of what we saw. The one thing that I hated a lot about this year was that we did not get to see more Yuri De Los Santos because of his injury. I know he was struggling a lot before he was injured and put on the shelf, but he showed some stuff at times that looked pretty good. And he's still a pretty young guy. You also wish that David Bednar would have been healthier. They offload Chris Stratton to St. Louis. I just don't really know if I want to see Robert Stevenson and Tyler Beede and Eric Stout and all of these other guys that are just here really a part of it.
I don't think you will. Most of those guys are going to be 40-man fodder, and Tyler Beede already elected free agency, so don't worry about him.
Yeah.
I think your bullpen, the only for sure's are really Colin Holderman, David Bednar, Will Crow. I would think Yuri De Los Santos, should he be healthy. That's probably, the 4 you can most count on. But, I mean, I would think Zach Thompson is probably going to work his way into the bullpen. I think that's a guy. Wilson is a guy. Bryce Wilson is probably a guy that's going to wind up there. I would think if everything goes really, really well, and some of these rookies look like they're ready to go, like Mike Burrows or whoever we just named, even Ortiz, you could find somebody like JT Brubaker finding his way to the bullpen. I don't think that's a bad thought either. He's a guy that you put him in the bullpen and tell him he's going to give you 2 innings. He's a guy that can hit 97 on the gun. He's got a devastating arsenal. I mean, he could be a really, really effective bullpen piece for you. So, I mean, you may start the season with one thing, you're going to end it with another. I think we know that. We watch that every year. This isn't like the Yankees who have 5 established starters, and that's who's going to be their starters unless there's injuries. And if somebody gets injured, they're going to make a trade for the biggest name on the block. It's not the way this is going to work. But they've got a lot of options, and that bullpen is going to get stronger because of it.
Yes, and that's what I also go back to is I see a lot of people talking about free agency, talking about what the Pirates need to do, what they need to go get. I agree. They need to go get one starting pitcher just because I don't think you need to put that much pressure on guys like Mike Burrows and Ortiz and those guys to be in the rotation that quickly because I don't think it's going to happen. I think they're going to be patient with Burrows, sadly, even though I think I would love to see him in spring training. But hard to talk about spring training when it's the middle of October, but we don't know yet. But let's also never forget that Kevin Newman broke the spring training batting record, and he's still here, so you never know. But there's not really, I don't think, a major need, as you mentioned earlier, for Ben Cherington to say, I need to go sign 3 pitchers. Why?
I mean, I think they need left-handed help. They've got Manny Benuelos, and that's it. And next spring, you're going to see, I think, Joe Jocks probably get a little bit of a look, should he not get picked up in the Rule 5, which is possible. But they don't have anything. They need a lefty starter to me. They need a lefty bullpen. So I see a couple free agent opportunities there. It's just, it doesn't mean that the cupboard's bare. It just means they need a little bit more of a mix. You got to change some things up, and that's all. But I mean, I didn't even mention Chase DeYoung. He was in my mind the best bullpen arm they had, the most consistent all year, and he's got to be back. So I mean, they've got more pieces than I think they get credit for, and the way that the season finished is a lot of the reason. All those injuries to the back end and everything just absolutely destroyed that bullpen.
Oh,
And
it did.
overuse from early on, not trusting the starters, which I've been told next year will not be the case. They are going to let them go a little bit more. So,
Which I will be excited to see. Give me Mitch Keller and Rowanzi 6 to 7 inning starts, like when they're actually on it, because I get it. I mean you're like with the team that you currently possess in 2021 or 2022 at certain points. I understood it, but also if the guy's dealing, the guy's dealing. I forget who it was. I want to say it was Brubaker had that one game where he pitched 7 innings and he was only at like 85, 88 pitches, I think. And him and Shelton were on the bench, like talking to each other, and he asked him if he wanted to go back out, and I think he said yes. And then I don't remember what happened. I think they did let Brubaker go into the eighth that game. This was very recent too. This wasn't like a while ago. This was like in September.
I mean, there was the Bryce Wilson game where he gave them 8 and they didn't let him go out and finish and go
Yes, I
into
do
the
remember
ninth.
that.
But yeah, that's a little different than artificially stopping everybody at 5 innings, early on. And I understand that spring training was stunted again last year. That was the excuse used. The year before it was COVID restrictions. The year before that it was the 60 games and COVID again. I guess let's just try to go into this with an open mind. Let's
Yes,
assume they're smarter than that. My my complaint really was I watch a lot of baseball in a lot of other markets. I didn't see other people handling their pitching staff like that.
no,
So it was a case to me of the Pirates trying to be smarter than everybody else, and the result was they looked dumber than everybody else. So next year, come the spring, let's give us a normal spring. Let's see what it comes out like. Let's let these pitchers pitch. Let's see
and
what you do.
I think they will, and I hope they will, because I think what me and you are basically saying here as we're wrapping up the starting pitching player reviews and pitching as a whole, this team has guys now, and guys that we can look forward to for a while. One, because they have a lot of team control, but also two, they're just only going to get better. That's what I always preach about this team. That's what I'm going to preach during these player reviews a lot, is a lot of the guys that we're going to be talking about in general for the next like year or so are only going to get better. I mean, tomorrow when I talk about catchers, I'm going to go ahead and let you everybody know now before we talk about catchers tomorrow afternoon or tomorrow whenever we or not tomorrow, yeah, Tuesday. Not going to talk a lot about Jose Godoy and Tyler Heineman and all those guys. We'll talk a little bit about it. We're going to talk about somebody who literally just made the all prospect team on MLB Network at the catcher position that more than likely will not end up at that position anyway. That isn't named Henry Davis. That's another guy. When you were saying it earlier about the guy jumping from single A up to the major league level, I was like, is he talking about Endy right now too? Yeah, the Pirates are starting to find talent a little bit in some of the spots they need to find talent in. It just would have been great if if they would have kept a certain guy who was on a 2-year contract at first base that actually wasn't playing too bad, and maybe that would have fixed itself.
I think that they found some answers more than I think it looked like record wise. I think next year will be a better year, just through attrition. Even if they do nothing, even if they punt or whatever you want to call it. I think Roberto Perez is a virtual lock to come back. And I wouldn't rule out Jose Quintana. I know he's made himself some money, like with the way he pitched this year. But I mean, I've got it on very good authority, and I've heard DK reported as well, Dejan Kovacevic. He owes a lot of what he became this year to Oscar Marin and is very vocal about it. So don't roll that out.
That would
And
be so awesome.
yeah, I do think that he's at least somebody they're going to consider. So, it could be a really special year. It could be an accidental special year. They could come out like gangbusters and fall off, a la 2012.
Yeah,
You know?
they really, and that's where end off this episode. That's where I kind of have my mind set on 2023. I think it's going to be a mixture of the 2012 and 2013 season. Two very different seasons, but I think they're going to be right in the middle of that sweet spot in between those 2 years where you started seeing things come together a little bit. You started seeing things like, okay, the Pirates are going to be contending pretty soon. We don't know when, but I do think you're going to see it at some point. And also, to end off the starting pitching player reviews for 2022, at this time last year, I was calling for Oscar Marine's head. I think most everybody was. And Gary said something last year that was contingent on where Oscar Marine currently is. His job was set on one guy. That one guy just happened to be the best pitcher on the Pirates pitching staff this year in Mitch Keller. That is why Oscar Marine still has a job right now. That is why Oscar Marine is actually regarded as a pretty good pitching coach right now, because Mitch Keller finally figured it out.
If I had to put a bow on the starting pitching talk, I would have to say they were frighteningly healthy this year. Like, you can't expect that kind of health. That's how healthy they were this year. Don't expect that again next year. So when we talk about that depth, when Ethan and I come up with that list of, 8 to 10 guys that we feel can play a role, don't be so quick to want to flush Zach Thompson down the toilet, because you might need that guy to be able to step in and be a starter for you.
Yep.
There's a lot of these guys that I think a lot of us want to flush that, hold up.
It's like, wait a second, you're going to probably actually need this guy. And that's what they're there for. But with that said, guys, thank you for tuning in to the first set of player reviews for 2022. As mentioned, tomorrow we're going to get a little bit into the relief pitching, the catching, and the first base spot. On Wednesday, we're going to get into a little bit of the middle infield. O'Neal Cruz will be getting his own episode on Thursday, because I think it's warranted that I could talk about O'Neal Cruz for 30 minutes. And Ke'Bryan Hayes will probably be on Friday. He also warrants one as well, because there's a lot to unpack about Ke'Bryan Hayes from this year that is very interesting. And I think a lot of people will enjoy it. But with that said, guys, thank you so much for tuning into the Locked On Pirates podcast today with myself, Ethan Smith, and Gary Morgan. Guys, see you tomorrow. See Gary next Monday. And guys, we are out.